Someone told me they were happy that the mechanical problem in the plane was discovered while it was still on the ground. I felt exactly the same way. But I had a 6 o'clock flight, and when I arrived there and saw that it was canceled, my heart sunk. I know that if that had been Portland, Maine I was going to, I wouldn't have another flight till tomorrow or something. But fortunately, there was an 8:30, so it's good to be with you. How's everybody? You've been relaxing now for too long. We have to go to work. Well, it's a great joy to be with you. I think you know, I know you know, that Archbishop Bicklein is a major force in catechesis in the Conference of Bishops. And I don't need to detail that because I think this audience knows it well, but I've had the privilege of serving with the Archbishop in a number of committees to do with our common task of faith formation, and it's a joy to visit this great archdiocese, and also with Harry through the MCCL. But great to be with you. Now listen, as we get started today, we will have some time built in for some conversation and all of that. But I want to encourage you also, even in the course of my sharing of my thoughts, if you have a question that just needs to be asked, or an insight you just want to share with the group or something, just put your hand up, okay? I think it's very important you feel that freedom as we move on. The one thing I've done more than anything else in my ministry as a priest and bishop in the past has been to be a teacher, classroom teacher. High school and seminary and college, and so I can take just about anything. So don't hesitate. We got a deal? All right. Let me see. Oh, good. Let me find out who is here from what different elements of ministry in the Archdiocese. Now, many of us, in how we define our ministry, have a lot of overlap. Would you think so? And different things. But you probably have a primary definer. How many of you are primarily parish catechetical leaders, would you say? Wow. Okay, and I know you do other things. Let's see the priests and the deacons, the clergy. Okay. And how many would say that you are primarily youth ministry leaders? Okay. Catholic school leaders? Our CIA initiation people, a few. How many would say you are in the work of evangelization? Okay, you passed my test. That's always my first test, because if there's one overriding principle in the new directory for catechesis, as you know, it's that everything we do, not only in catechesis, but across all of the ministries represented here, everything has an evangelizing dimension to it. And we'll talk about that today. The more we can have our consciousness really embedded with that principle, the more effective I think we can be as we go forward, because we have a big challenge, huh? There's no question. Now, I know you've had another presentation, many of you, introducing the directory. Oh, when was that, Harry? Was that a while ago? A year ago, okay. And so you know basically some of the history and why we have the thing. And let me simply remind us all that the National Directory for Catechesis is one of a stream of very important documents from the Holy See and from our own, the church in our own country, that has come from the vision of the Second Vatican Council in the decree on bishops of Vatican II, Christus Dominus. That was the beginning. The bishops of the world were challenged to really take a look at the state of catechesis and try to bring a unified vision and strengthen the work of handing on the faith. Somehow I think we dropped the ball a couple of decades there after the council in some ways, but we've picked it up and we're bouncing it, I think, now in a way that's very vigorous and very effective. So that's where it came from. But you know, we had, those of us who are veterans, I just turned 60 in March. So now I can comfortably say I'm a veteran. But now that was your chance to say, Bishop, you don't look that old. You just lost a beautiful opportunity. But the fact of the matter is, those of us who are veterans remember the earlier National Catechetical Directory. What was the name of it? Sharing the Light of Faith. And wasn't that a terrific document? Well, many things have happened since that document. Many things have happened in our world. Many things have happened in the life of the church. We have the new catechism for the Catholic Church. Then the new general directory for catechesis in the 90s. And so it was time to have this too. Why do we need this? Let me tell you a story that helps me to kind of frame it. When I was a young priest, teaching in the seminary, I had a little more freedom with my summer months than I had had when I was a parish priest. Those of us in schoolwork would always agree that the three best things about being in school work are June, July, and August, of course. But we had assignments, but we could do some more creative kinds of things. I spent a month in Montana one time just filling in a parish. Anyhow, one summer, I just stayed and worked in a parish in the Boston area, and every week I would visit a nursing home. And I developed a wonderful relationship, wonderful friendship with an elderly priest. I was about 33, 34 at the time. He was about 93, 94. And every Wednesday when I would visit the nursing home, I'd have a conversation with the old guy. I used to look forward to it. And toward the end of the summer, it's time to return to the seminary and get ready to teach. And I was having what I figured was probably the last of my conversations with him. And I don't know where this question came from, but I said to him, Monsignor, as you grow older, what is it that you fear the most? And he thought for a moment, and then he said this: as I grow older, what I fear the most is that I would ever lose my ability to see. Now, I missed his point entirely, and I said, listen, I have a great ophthalmologist. I said, I'll get you an appointment, I will drive you there. And he's ever so gently, and not derisively at all, he started to laugh at me. He said, oh, no. He used to call me son. I called him Monsignor, 60 years between us. He said, son, these eyes are fine, thank God. What I fear the most is that I'd ever lose my ability to see the way God would have me see. That I never lose my ability to look at the world, to look at other people, to look at myself, to look at everything the way God wants me to see. I thought that was beautiful wisdom. I never have forgotten it. And I often explain the reason for the new National Directory for Catechesis as a way of renewing our vision, a way of seeing the way the church, and through the church, the way the Lord is inviting us to see both the challenges that we face, those are pretty obvious, and the opportunities that are there. Sometimes we can over-focus on the challenge and forget them, but there are opportunities as well. But in order to renew our passion for catechesis, do you want to renew your passion? I hope that doesn't sound like a passionate response. We need to renew our passion for catechesis, but I believe that before we can renew our passion for catechesis, we have to renew our vision of what it is all about. Because the directory stretches us to see that it's more than sometimes we think it is. Now, I want to start today by focusing a little bit on something that the directory focuses on right at the beginning. There's chapter 1, there's a very intriguing title, Proclaiming the Gospel in the United States. Is the directory suggesting there's something specific about the challenges and opportunities of doing this work here? Of course. And I'd like us to think a little bit about this, because we really can't figure out how to do what we have to do unless we keep our finger on the pulse of the cultures in which we're doing our ministry, don't you think? We have to be aware. The General Directory for Catechesis, from which this National Directory was born, begins with that beautiful story from the Gospel of the sower and the seed. That one is so relevant to our ministry, isn't it? Because we are the tenders of the seed. The Holy Spirit sows the seed, but we are the tenders of the seed, the farmers. And so, Jesus says the guy threw some seed on rock. What happens to the seed? It blows away. He threw some seed in the thorns. It's choked to death. He threw some seed on rich earth, rich soil, and it blossomed. And so the directory said that one of the things people in our ministry always has to do, is to analyze the soil in which we go about our work tending the seed. To analyze the soil. To be kind of spiritual agronomists, as it were. And that's a matter of looking at the culture. It's such an important thing. The directory names a number of the dominant elements, the dominant factors in American culture, and looks at them in terms of lights and shadows. We don't have time to go through it all. Many of you have studied the directory, but one example is freedom. They use the example of freedom. Freedom is embedded in our American consciousness as a value, isn't it? And we're known for it, a commitment to freedom. Not that everybody in our country is always as free in some ways as we'd like in terms of free to live a good life and have food and a place to live, but freedom is a huge American value. It's a light in the culture, isn't it? Does freedom have a shadow side? Who says yes? What's an example? Yes, exactly. How about this notion that I can pretty much do just whatever I want? How about the whole pro-choice thing? That people would argue that from freedom. But freedom is to choose what is right, isn't it? Is to choose what is good, is to choose the truth. And so there's a beautiful light to freedom, but there's also, in the way it can be interpreted by some people, there is a shadow. And that's an example of looking at the soil in which we live. Those things affect the way people think. Pope Benedict cautioned the church shortly after his election that he didn't use exactly this language, but one of the things that's in the soil right now of the church, of the world, is relativism. That's a complicated philosophical thing, but it's really very simple, huh? It's the idea that really there isn't any truth, or if there is any truth, you really can't find out what it is. And it takes I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was teaching in a Catholic women's college in the Boston area, Emmanuel College. And I was teaching kind of a Catholicism 101 course. You know who was in my class was Nancy Kerrigan. Remember the figure skater? She should have won the gold, An archbishop one time told me the reason the Russian girl won is, he said, if you noticed, Father, the Russian girl made the sign of the cross before she went on the ice. Nancy didn't. And then he said, aren't you the one who taught her theology? Thank you very much. It's just what I needed. But one day after class, this sophomore came up to me and she said, Father, I can understand and appreciate just about everything you're teaching us. Now, what words grab my attention? Just about. And that's good. You don't want sponges in front of you, huh? You want people who are going to think and react. So I said, what is it that you're struggling with? She said, I think you said that reincarnation is incompatible with Christian faith. I said, good for you. You got it. And she said, well, I don't agree with you. So I went on, I told her, it's a no-brainer, huh? Reincarnation, it fits into the structure of some of the Eastern thought, but it's not Christian. The notion that if you live this life well, you'll come back as something or someone even better. If you live it poorly, you come back as a mosquito or something like that, right? You know what I mean? I'm simple. This is not fair to the Eastern religions, but it's not. You cannot reconcile it with Christianity because you and I are distinct, unique beings, God's creation, from the moment of conception all the way through into eternity, aren't we? You don't turn into something else. And when you get to heaven, you don't turn into an angel. You'll be a saint, God willing, right? But it's you. So I explained it to her very lucidly, and not quite as dramatically as I just did then, It's one of those standing up at the desk after class, And you know what she said at the end? Well, she said, Father, thank you very much. You have your opinion, I have mine. And that's a very simple example of relativism. It's nothing to do with opinion, huh? Nothing. It's a simple fact. It's a truth that Christianity is about certain things and not about others. So, and you know, when you're working with people, including ourselves, as peers, we always have to have an antenna for that stuff. That relativism, the Pope's not exaggerating. It's a very, very dominant thing in the culture, and affects the way we go about things. I don't want to spend too long on that thing, but just this general idea of paying attention to the nutrients in the soil, and we have a little faith sharing question that relates to this a little later, but the nutrients that are in the soil where you and I do our ministry, and the heart, the rocks. It's good to pay attention to those kinds of things, to analyze the cultures in which we do what we do. There's an Irish Jesuit named Michael Gallagher. You may have heard of him. He spoke at the NCCL this year. But several years ago, he published a very intriguing book with the title Clashing Symbols. Not symbols, C-Y-M, like in a drum and bugle corps, but S-Y-M. And this Clashing Symbols, and the subtitle is Introduction to Faith and Culture. And I just want to give you a couple of his thoughts very quickly on this, because it really is something that we have constantly to be scanning as we figure out how to be effective in the works of evangelization, catechesis, whatever faith formation work we're involved in. Father Gallagher makes the point that the cultures in which we live are never neutral. In other words, we might not be paying any attention to it, but it's not neutral. He said the cultures, he says culture singular, I talk about cultures plural, because it has all kinds of levels. I should really define what we're talking about here too. We're talking about generally the mood, the atmosphere, the general assumptions and values that are floating around. Huh? It's an atmosphere more than a system, isn't it? It's an atmosphere. You can, if you look hard at the newspapers, the editorials, watch the advertising, check what's going on in the media, you can start to be aware of dominant things in the culture. But he says that culture is a hidden set of control mechanisms that shape us. Like he says, an unrecognized ocean in which we swim, a hidden persuader in our midst, the air we breathe that may be healthy or polluted, a transmitter, all the culture, sending almost subliminal messages that affect our priorities without our knowing it. And then he says this, I'm building up to this line, when we swim in this ocean or see through this lens, everything seems utterly normal and neutral. Awakening to its non-neutrality is a first step toward a Christian response to culture. You see where I'm going with that? Very important, because we do not do our ministry in a vacuum. We just don't do it in a vacuum. You know that, and I know that. Huh? Now, just for a moment, because you're going to do this, ordinarily when I do this part of this little presentation, I ask people to work at the tables for about 5 minutes, but we're going to have a chance for that a little later in a prayerful context. So let me just ask, just right now to brainstorm out loud, think about it for a second. What do you think are some of the forces, the values, the ways of thinking, the attitudes that are just part of our environment? Now, obviously that changes as you move around the world, as you move around the country, as you move around within your own state. But there are things that are there. Relativism's a big one. At a meeting I was at in San Francisco a few weeks ago, this kind of a day, someone said, how about the heavy materialism, consumerism thing? That what's most important is what I can buy, or all that kind of stuff. How much money I have. This is nothing new, but it shapes the way people value, doesn't it? Let's hear a few. Yes.
One experience is historical perspective. Most people, when we talk at first, think in years of, say, 20 years, and trying to expand that historical perspective and then open it up to the transcendent is quite a difficult task.
You're absolutely right. That's right. And it's something we just can't count on it, as we maybe one time could count on it. Huh? Exactly. Yes?
I think individualism is a very powerful force in our culture, and it's directly opposed most often to communitarianism.
Absolutely. I think that's very well said, which is one of the reasons why I know you reviewed the 6 tasks of catechesis. That's a great way to spend a little bit of in-between time. You saved me some time, huh? Right? Knowledge of doctrine, the worship, the moral life, prayer, community. The first 4 are the pillars of the catechism. You know the pillars of the catechism. In this archdiocese, you just have to know them. I know that. I have no question. But besides the 4 pillars of the catechism, doctrine, liturgy, sacrament, moral life, and prayer, the directory says there are 2 others we got to work on all the time. Whether it's with 2nd graders, or parents, or teenagers, or whatever it might be, developing a sense of what it is to live as part of a community. The directory notices around the world that in many places that's a problem, as you said. And of course the other one is what? Mission, sense of mission. Even bigger than service, is being part of the mission of Christ, which is a servant mission, of course. But anyway, okay, some more, just 2 or 3 more. You're going to do some exercise down there next. Go ahead.
Militarism and the technology that flows, because our young people see every situation now, nuke them, send a cruise missile, solve the problem with the military.
It's pretty scary, huh? Yeah. While you're going down there, I'll give another one. A year ago, I gave a talk up at the University of Maine at Orono. You probably didn't know we had a university in Maine, but we do. And I was giving, wasn't this talk, it was a talk about Catholic faith and higher education, but I was talking about culture at the beginning, because I almost always do. And I said to the students, in terms of this ocean that you swim in on this campus all the time, in terms of people's values and assumptions, can you think of anything that's kind of just there in the atmosphere? And you may not think of it too often. They thought for a moment. One young woman put her hand up. She said, yeah. She said, I think on this campus it is assumed by an awful lot of people that if you're bright, if you're a university student, and you're forward thinking, you are pro-choice. She said to me, I'm not. I'm not, she said, but she said, when I stop to think about it, I can feel it on this campus. It's an attitude among a lot of people. And that's what I'm talking about. It's in the culture of that campus. And there are all kinds of other things you could have. You could have, well anyway, I want to hear from you. Yes?
Because of the multiplicity of choices that families have to make now with regard to all kinds of events, we can no longer assume that the choice about faith and practice of faith would be a priority over and above anything else, that it's just all a gigantic, overwhelming buffet.
Exactly.
And there isn't a priority of selecting faith.
I think you said that with great precision, brother. When I was an auxiliary in Massachusetts, there's the town of Bellingham, Massachusetts. You never heard of it, and there's really no reason for you to go there on a vacation, to tell you the truth. But in Bellingham, the Christian clergy in the town became so frustrated that Sunday morning was all eaten up by all kinds of town sports activities. That they finally got together. They figured we have whined about this long enough. So they got together, the Catholic, the Baptist, the Episcopalian, the Lutheran, the whole bunch of them went down to the town hall, and they said, you know what, enough. We've had it. We've got to liberate Sunday morning for church services and family life and all. And you know what? It worked. It was a great ecumenical initiative, and they cleared out. Now, when I was in another diocese recently, and one of the rocks in the soil that the woman mentioned, she said, we have all kinds of diocesan CYO activities on Sunday morning. Well, that is a problem we should be able to lick. I mean, that's an in-house thing, you know what I mean? Anyway, don't get me started on that. Okay, yes.
I work with teenagers, and the desire to be entertained is a big one.
Oh, yeah. And that's why, as you know, the desire to be entertained on the part of young people, that's why I think the directory is very realistic. It has a good section on media, on technology, and of course points out to us, again, is like the internet and all of the developments in the media, is all of that a blessing in some ways? Of course it is. And we have to use the blessing, but also, is there a shadow side to it Absolutely. And that's part of the shadow. The other part of the shadow that's even more serious is all the destructive stuff that kids can download now. And you know what? They can find ways to download it, no matter how careful parents are at home. There's other places they can do it. It's scary. Cardinal Keeler in Baltimore is always is a proponent of our being more aware and more effective at helping our people deal with the challenge of resisting the bad stuff that comes through the media. But both good and bad. We also need to be able to, children learn differently now because of the internet, don't they? It's not just that computer is one more class along with social studies and math and all that. Used to be that way at the beginning. Now, computer is the way they learn almost everything. And that's why the catechetical community has to be on board with that. Yes, one more.
Real quickly, you jumped on what I was going to say. Listening to the comment about the busyness in the schedule reminded me of something Thomas Merton said, and I was going to mention that the technology has accelerated the busyness. Thomas Merton called all of the busyness and overscheduling a form of contemporary violence. When we start to view busy schedules as a violence, something tearing at the fabric of our community and our faith, rather than as a choice to fill our lives and our calendars, I think that changing perspective is huge.
I think that's a very good insight from Merton, and you articulated very well. Exactly. Just as we were speaking, as you were speaking then, this contraption I have now, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, this thing here gets emails from my office, and I felt my hip just buzzing. It means my chancellor is after me, but he's going to have to wait. I thought I shut it off, but I think I had to pull a battery right out of it. Okay, now those are just a few examples to emphasize the point that very first important chapter of the directory makes, as did the general directory of the catechesis, that we must maintain an awareness of these kinds of things and strategize with those things in mind, because they truly do shape the thinking, the valuing of people. And I think one of the things we can do, especially with adults, is just to raise consciousness about some of that stuff. Huh? It's a great thing to be doing in small adult faith formation discussions and things. What do you think the things influencing us are? Again, the bottom line is simply this, to close this little section. We do not evangelize, we do not catechize. We who are ordained do not preach the gospel at Sunday Mass in a vacuum. That's the point. And I mean, it's a no-brainer, really. But I think we have to be paying an awful lot of attention to that. Because there's also stuff, we're going to move on, but there's also a lot, there are nutrients in the soil as well, aren't there? It's not all bleak. Well, you know what, let's be fair. Let's be fair. Let's give someone a chance to name something that's in the soil of our culture that is what we would have called semina verdi, seeds of the word, things that fertilize the seed. What would be an example? I mean, freedom, rightly understood, is. That's a nutrient, isn't it? You just do one quickly. Gives Harry some exercise, too.
Service to others.
Exactly. There is, especially among young people, there is almost a natural generosity. I find it all the time in people, not just young people, but I see it particularly there. I see it particularly in high school students. There's a beautiful thing to build on there. The mistake we make there, the opportunity we miss there sometimes, in my opinion, is we encourage the service and the outreach, but we don't always help them to reflect on how this is an expression of being a disciple of Christ. Because, don't forget, they do the service in public schools too, and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and everything. For us, it's a manifestation of being a disciple, and it's because in the face of the one we're serving, we see the face of the Lord. Okay. Well, we better come down. Here comes the microphone. It's like the old Phil Donahue program, you know? Sorry to mention that here.
I find a returning interest in spirituality.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is a return. Do you sense that too? You know why? Because there always is that we're made to live in communion with God, aren't we? That's why we exist. God creates us to live in communion with Him. And so the more we pay attention to that, the more our lives are the way they ought to be. the more, if we don't pay attention to it, remember the old song, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places? That's what we get in. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing a verse of it to you. I want you to stay at least through lunch. But, you know, that's the thing. And there is a hunger for spirituality because we're made with that hunger. We're created with an openness for God. Carl Rahner says God creates us with an emptiness only God can fill. Augustine, huh? God, you made us restless. Isn't that a wonderful quote? We've heard it a zillion times. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Adult faith formation, help people be in touch with their restlessness and know it's reaching for God. Okay? All right. All these kinds of things. Although the problem with the spirituality hunger is, again, it's tending not to, at least for younger people, it doesn't tend toward an institutional communitarian connection. It tends to, as someone said earlier, it tends to be kind of privatized, over-individualized. The studies show that, you know, especially with young adults, that they want to have this spiritual experience, but they're not so sure they want to commit to a community of faith. But there's an opportunity there to show people how that community experience deepens and enriches it all, and takes us out of our Lone Rangerism, huh? I always tell young people, whatever you do, don't try to live your Catholic life like a Lone Ranger. We have one another. Sometimes you can feel like a Lone Ranger. I used to be chaplain at Harvard University back in the 90s, and boy, that's a place, it's a wonderful university, obviously, it's a strong Catholic community, but that's a place, if you analyze the culture and the dominant values and ways of thinking. I used to have students come to see me, Catholic students. One student said to me once, you know, Father, some people on this campus think that if you're a practicing Catholic, it means you've just given half your brain away. You don't think anymore. You know, that kind of stuff. And no, I better not, I don't know how I get into that. But anyway, we'll leave it where it was. Yes, Harry, come and sit down. You can relax now. Okay, so that's, you may think I overstressed that part of it. It's only the first, we're not going to do that with every chapter, obviously, be here till Christmas. But I think it's so key. Then, the directory moves on, as you know, for the rest of it, into the mission. Into the mission. Avery Dulles, Cardinal Dulles, who, as you know, has written so many wonderful theological works, and a lot of it on the church, on ecclesiology. In one of his little essays, I forget where I found this, but Dulles is writing about a proper understanding of what the church is. And he says, being a member of the church, I'm paraphrasing, is not like belonging to some kind of salvation club. I love that line. In other words, you know, a club, you join up, you go through the initiation, you pay dues, you get the benefits, you might do a little philanthropy on the side. Dulles says, being a Catholic is not belonging to a salvation club. He said, it is about mission, that we are Catholic, because it's all about salvation, huh? But we've been called to mission. And of course, if anyone were to ask you, well, let's pretend you're on, do you want to be a millionaire? Yeah, everybody's watched that program at least once. That's all I could stand, was once. Who wants to be a millionaire? The church exists in order to do fundraisers and bingo games, provide a comfortable support group for basically like-minded individuals. I'm making these up as I go along here. C, generate all kinds of rules and regulations to provide law and order for the common good. I don't know what else. Which one is it? Anything yet? Okay, let's see. We want to quote Paul VI. Evangelii Enunciandi. The church exists in order to evangelize. Enough people knew the answer to make me survive having asked the question, but not enough people responded. If you ever want to know why the church exists, the church exists in order to evangelize. He says evangelization is the church's essential mission. And that it's not a specific ministry, although some people have special expertise in evangelization. And there are some folks who do some wonderful writing on it. You know, the Polish fathers have as a community done a lot of good work. Many of you know Father John Hurley. But the fact of the matter is that evangelization is the work of whom in the church? Every one of us. To find ways to, by word and witness, to draw other people to Christ. That's it. You know, people get very nervous about that word evangelization. And for us as Catholics, it means all sorts of things as you unpack it, but fundamentally, it is simply to live one's Catholic life in such a way that it gives witness to others, not that we're perfect, but that we're different because we belong to Jesus. There's something different about a Christian, a Catholic Christian, any good Christian. And sometimes it means more than that. Sometimes it means finding ways, or more overtly, to draw people to the Lord. I bet I'm not the only person here who has someone in his or her family who has become a little bit inactive in the church. Am I alone in this? No. I wish I were, to tell you the truth. For your sake, I mean, I'd feel very lonely, but for your sake, no. When I look around some of my cousins' stuff, you know, it's sad. But you know, the fact of the matter is, you and I, if we take a deep breath with some of those people, it's harder when it's in your family. But take a deep breath, believe a whole lot in Jesus. You know what I do? I sometimes make myself, with fear and trembling, say to someone like that, gee, I know you've been away from the church for a while. Sometimes you don't even just say it, you know it. Is there anything I can do to help you with that? Let it go at that. Just that little bit of a gracious invitation. Not any attitude, right? No, nothing judgmental. But anything I can do. Have to be the right setting. Because the first target, you know, the church has always talked about evangelization to ad gentes, unto the world, because we want everybody to know about Jesus. But then John Paul II called us to the new evangelization. And what is the first target audience of the new evangelization? Inactive Catholics. Right, inactive Catholics, that huge majority, at least on the East Coast. I suspect you have the same struggle here. That huge group of good people who, for some reason or other, have not had that kind of experience, have not been fully evangelized, or whatever. Who knows what's happened? There are many causes and effects going on there. But so the directory tells us, and here's another of the big principles, that all of our thinking and doing in the work of catechesis, whatever you're doing, youth ministry, Catholic schools, across the board, all of it has to have an intentional evangelizing dynamic to it. In fact, they really talk about catechesis in a new way. They say all catechesis must be evangelizing catechesis. So that we're supposed to be trying to arouse faith as well as to inform it. And that's one of the key, you know that already, some of you, one of the key insights of the directory is we can't take for granted, you know, that somehow there's been a sense of God's grace is at work all the time. That's what we have going for us, right? That we should never forget. It's not all up to you and me. But the fact of the matter is we want to be intentionally evangelizing. That is the key. The American bishops, U.S. bishops some years ago, before I was one, Archbishop was one, but I was not, decided to create a national plan for evangelization in our country. And many of you know about this, but it's called Go and Make Disciples. If you have not studied this with your colleagues, study it, please. If you have studied it long ago,